Targeted and state-sponsored, these are today's cyber adversaries. So first, targeted. At one institution I worked with earlier this year, we found that the malware present on their network had been so customized for them that it hard-coded the individual names of each of the assets that the malware was meant to target. This could only have been done through deep reconnaissance. We believe the intruders were in the network for at least 3 months designing the software and customizing it for them, yet there was only one institution it ever would have worked against. And it did, to the tune of tens of millions of credit card numbers. This requires an immense amount of resources to pull off. It's like designing, testing, retesting, and deploying a piece of software that you only get to use once. Can you imagine a company like Microsoft designing, over the course of months, a piece of software for one-time use at one client? State-sponsored. And at another breach we responded to earlier this year, we found clear technical evidence of state sponsorship. We could look at the geographic mapping of the activity of where it was originating from, the timing to correspond to the local workday, and we could see the actual deployment of different skill sets in a regular pattern that suggested that people were actually working in regular work shifts. In these cases, the hackers are essentially bureaucrats who are hacking on behalf of their companies. There's a lot of technical evidence to suggest this. Some of my favorite evidence is actually soft. Online, you can find the resumes of some enterprising young members of the former People's Liberation Army, where they tout their key accomplishments like intruding into foreign corporations. Mike McConnell, who's the former director of national intelligence from the US intelligence community, believes that there are 100,000 Chinese professionally employed hacking into US networks. Of course, this has also been the year of highly publicized data infiltrations for financial gain, where we see retailers are hacked and immediately millions of credit cards appear on underground sites. At Target, that was 42 million credit cards. At Home Depot, 56 million credit cards. Most of us were probably touched by this in some year, had a card reissued because of fraud. For the Americans in the audience, you had a 1 in 2 chance this year of having some personal information exposed, according to the Financial Services Roundtable. In this sense, the hackers essentially have a cozy relationship with the government, potentially implicit support. You can't be extradited in Russia, for example, for financial crimes against foreign corporations, and there are no local penalties for doing so. So Target, Home Depot, Westinghouse, these have all been hacked this year. Organizations are increasingly proving themselves unable to respond to the new class of cyber threats. Why is this the case? So the current enterprise network is extremely complex and distributed, where everything from the hardware that's installed to the applications that are run to the activities that the employees perform on the internet can potentially be a vector for attack. The first generation of defense was about erecting higher walls. So you'd have a perimeter that you'd seek to harden. Of course, we know there's no wall anymore. You can VPN into your corporate network from home. You store sensitive corporate data on third-party applications. So organizations are responding now by deploying sensors across their network. There's a lot of technical innovation here that's happening to detect malicious activity at each potential egress or ingress point. But the less appreciated point here is that each of these systems actually generates a massive amount of data, and most of that data is noise. So the real challenge now is how do you surface the signal out of the vast noise that is being generated? Because most breaches that we responded to this year actually did create some kind of alert of suspicious activity that was either ignored or dismissed because the organizations failed to appropriately contextualize the information in front of them. So there's this problem now where we actually need to have humans who can actually interact with this data. And this is the big data problem we're seeing, that intruders are hiding in the noise. And defending organizations need to respond against their human adversaries with their own humans who can look at these trends and potentially spot novel patterns. So we have a technology problem, which is how do you reduce the friction between your defenders and their data assets? And you have a people problem, which is that fundamentally there just aren't that many people who are good at this. And what we're seeing now is this kind of fundamental offensive-defensive asymmetry, where human attackers require human defenders, but whereas attackers only need to succeed in one place once, defenders need to succeed everywhere continually. And the asymmetry is especially pronounced in cyber because the perimeter is so globally exposed. So anyone with an internet connection potentially can touch your perimeter. So thinking of previous battles of national castles or national borders, this may be one of the worst such asymmetries in history. So this creates potentially a bleak picture of a new normal of inevitable breaches. Honestly, I don't believe that our current approach of investing in technology and people is sufficient. So I'm going to ask a different question, which is, how can we actually drive down risk altogether? And here I'm going to propose 3 models for us to consider. The first model is to align corporate incentives that allows employees to actually bear risk and be part of the solution. So employees are actually the ultimate expression of the distributed perimeter. At a large institution like a multinational bank, there are 300,000 employees. Each one of those employees has a company-issued laptop, a company-issued mobile device, probably a personal laptop, a personal mobile device they can VPN from. That's about 1 million endpoints right there. And for this reason, this is why the hackers seek to exploit humans. Proofpoint, which designs secure email systems, estimated that 95% of breaches in the last year were caused by email. So how can we ignore employees in this game? I'd like to propose a concept of cyber securitization, creating a financial product that actually captures operational risk. So most of us here have probably received an email that is spoofed to look like it's from a credible party. The most successful types of phishing attempts these days are social invitations, order confirmations, financial warnings. Spear phishing like this against corporate employees is ubiquitous. And we see that just one employee can click on an email, and that can potentially impact the entire enterprise. Most estimates show that about 1% of malicious emails are clicked upon. So in our hypothetical 300,000 person environment, that's 3,000 potential vectors for attack. But many employees don't get it. They don't know how to get it. We see at the institutions we work with that every day employees are clicking on emails. Senior executives are often among the worst offenders. What if instead an organization created risk-bucketed pools where they actually would allocate their company by different types of function and risk? So you'd have a different team of sysadmins who have a different risk profile than tellers, who have a different risk profile than sellers. And you could actually imagine investing capital and allowing that capital to gain interest over time. And absent a cybersecurity event, that team could actually receive a financial reward for cyber awareness and good cyber practices. But if there was potentially an employee-induced cyber event, then that team would not receive a bonus. If, for example, an employee clicked on a malicious email, failed to update their password following a security announcement around something like Heartbleed. Securitizing cyber risk in this way could actually incentivize employees to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Obviously, a lot of details to work out here, but again, employees, by some measures, are 95% of the problem, and currently they're 0% of the solution. On to model 2. So cyber insurance right now is really driven by insurers seeking to understand risks so they can underwrite policies. There's a lot more we can do here, I think, to actually drive risk reduction. So I'm going to look at a more mature field of car insurance. And car insurance used to also be largely about underwriting policies so you could have more customers. But it later actually became a force for change. We can actually credit the car insurance industry with, for example, the wide adoption of seatbelts among US consumers where there wasn't before. Later, with safe driver programs for young people, they actually increased the competency of young drivers on the road. I remember when I was 17 receiving a package from my insurer that had a manual and a test that I had to take. And only by completing that test successfully was I allowed to continue to gain access to a good premium. This not only improved my competence, but actually helped everyone else who had to share the road with me. The future of car insurance is actually going to be a lot more data-driven. So we're going to see that consumers are going to assent to put a sensor in their car and share data up into their insurer. Insurers can then crunch data across all of their customer base and then be able to identify potentially the riskiest consumers that they have and force them to actually change their behaviors if they want to continue to have a favorable policy. Again, this might lead to things like speeding reductions, again providing macro-level benefits, not just to the individual policy holder. So how can we extend this behavior adaptation in car insurance to that of cyber? So what is the equivalent of seatbelts, young driver programs, and speeding in the cyber context? In this technical field, insurers alone probably won't be able to figure it out, but I think technology companies can actually play a role. And we're seeing tech companies get involved now because they have the expertise to be able to evaluate the risk posture of organizations that allows insurers to underwrite policies. But you could imagine a future where actually an insurer coupled with a technology company might require certain things of their customers. They might require the seatbelts, in this case, say, host-based intrusion prevention systems or malware detonation systems. They might require it to have some type of young driver program, in this case something like cybersecurity awareness briefings or potentially spearfishing their own employees to gauge compliance. And they may require the things like speeding reduction, which might be, say, introducing friction to remote access through two-factor authentication. As they collect data as well, if they're able to deploy sensors to these organizations, they actually might be able to discover new vulnerabilities they can push back to their customers. So with one customer, you're improving its own risk posture, but en masse, you're actually able to potentially discover entirely new vulnerabilities and improve the posture of the entire ecosystem. Which brings us to the third model. So the current state of information sharing is a lot of talk and less action. What we're seeing largely is that information sharing is happening in informal channels. So we'll see practitioners who are sharing information online. Senior executives will call their counterparties at other organizations. There are many worthwhile initiatives currently, like FSISAC, that are attempting to actually routinize sharing and make it a part of doing business. But the barriers are high. Most organizations currently feel like they're really exposing themselves by admitting that there's been some type of incident or some type of breach in their institution. There's a real opportunity here, I think, for regulators to step in and commit to safe harbor for sharing. Because the default position right now is that if you've been breached, you hide it until the absolute last second when you're required to disclose. And this is causing precious days, weeks, months when your peer institution might be targeted and you could have helped them and you're not. The sharing that we do see happening is actually around single indicators. So Bank A will say to Bank Y, here are 17 malicious IP addresses, you should block them. This can be useful, but it's insufficient because, again, as we noted earlier, organizations are drowning under the amount of data that they're seeing, and they don't have the talent that actually allows them to process it and contextualize it. So when sharing is ad hoc, organizations are still vulnerable. And information sharing can actually make things worse when it's done poorly. In many constructs now, we're seeing a lot of anonymous sharing happening, which often is really little better than noise. At Palantir, we're working on how to improve information sharing to be higher signal. This will likely involve sharing raw data. Because we believe that we need to be fundamentally shifting this paradigm here, that organizations with tens or hundreds even of information security engineers are not going to be able to routinely beat the professionalized armies of state-sponsored actors. What we need is a way to lever the top 1% of our information security engineers. One answer might be sharing raw data. So if organizations would commit to sharing not only process threat data, but actually raw data, then our top defenders could actually be empowered to go after the human adversaries we're facing from state-sponsored actors. It's really a question of talent, putting our best talent against their best talent, and doing so at scale. Organizations who are banded together and actually leveraging their top talent are going to be the ones that win. Thank you.